All right, Matt, thanks for taking the time today and to be on my podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time. Can you kind of introduce yourself? Tell me a little bit more about your background, and how it relates in the auto industry.
Yeah, so I have been specifically, doing sales in some capacities since 18. I came straight out of high school, went straight into the workforce. My first job out of high school was doing collections. I did collections for a company called Capital One. Most people probably have heard of that.
Mhm.
Did collections for probably the next 5 or 6 years. Had a small stint in real estate right around the time where the whole market crashed back in 2008. I was doing loans at that time, and then that time kind of jumped me into the automotive industry, into a more, I would say, advanced sales process. I worked at a company called Drive Time. I got the job there originally because of my collection experience, but then over time I ended up getting onto the sales floor, sold cars for a little bit, and then have been working primarily on the vendor side ever since. That's kind of the overall background. I currently work as the Chief Development Officer at a company called Worldwide BDC, where we kind of specialize in outsourcing of BDCs for dealerships, just kind of making it really easy, a plug and play offense, either to help train and upsell their current BDC at the store, or and a lot of times to outsource it. So that's kind of where I started and where I've ended at this point.
So tell me about that transition from, real estate and sales and kind of how that has carried over to your experience now as helping other organizations set up BDCs.
Yeah, so the automotive side, one thing I very quickly learned, which was how hard it is to do the job inside the dealership. Now, keep in mind, drive time was a far different thing than a lot of dealerships. I was selling a 28% interest rate for people who couldn't afford the car, on a car that was significantly overpriced, on a term that the car likely wouldn't last for at that time. When I moved over to the vendor side, it gave me a unique advantage for me to at least have an understanding of what somebody in the dealership would go through. But most of my experience was kind of learned on the job in regards to how to position whatever product I'm positioning to the dealership in a dealership way. I would say that in most cases, I would have been looked at as a disadvantage that I hadn't worked in the dealership world and wasn't able to initially speak that language. But I think it's worked well for me, being able to kind of attack it from a different perspective. Whether that's been me selling marketing services, or, was selling website services over at DealerOn and a couple other companies. The transition has gone really quickly and really smoothly.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you to kind of get into that a little bit more, right? You've worked for some big automotive names. You've worked for DealerSocket and DealerOn, um, you know, at relatively high level within the organizations. What was that like for you as an employee within those organizations? And you know, is what you're working on now at all related to some of the skills and stuff that you learned while you were there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the jobs I had for about a year and a half early in my career, kind of like one of my introductions into sales after leaving collections, was a company I used to sell direct TV inside of Best Buys and Sam's Clubs and Walmarts. And that job taught me probably the most valuable thing, which was, first off, how to sell and position a product that was not really easy to sell and position. But more importantly, it told me how to have the mentality that is so important to be able to go in and sell a product. And I learned at that job, and this is translated with me through every role I've ever had since, which is success in sales typically always comes down to three things. It comes down to pitch, pace, and your attitude. So either you can work on how you say things, you can work on how many volumes of customers you get a chance to talk to, or you can typically fix the mindset. And in a lot of the sales environments I've worked at, cold calling, appointment setting, selling products that weren't the best products out there, mindset has typically been the biggest difference. So Yes, I worked at DealerSocket, DealerOn, Team Velocity. I've worked with a lot of these big names. And when I first was at DealerSocket, I got to experience that vendor from a very different perspective. I was an entry-level sales rep, managing a territory, traveling into market every month, selling a inventory tool and a website to independent dealers that didn't necessarily want an inventory tool or a website at that time. I worked there for about 2 years. I eventually transferred over and moved on to DealerOn, where I did a similar role, but the momentum clicked when I got to DealerOn. I was in that role for less than 8 months before I was asked to move into a leadership role. I was in a regional leadership role for about a year. I still managed a territory and then oversaw about 5 people managing their territory. About a year later, I was moved into a senior regional role where I kind of created some new initiatives around building an inside sales team and some additional things. After a year, I was actually moved into the vice president of sales role where I oversaw the sales organization directly. We built an independent division. We scaled that used car or the inside sales team, which is like an SDR team, from 0 people to up over 40 people. We ended up having a sales team that was around 55 total people, encompassing inside and outside salespeople, and I oversaw that. From there, I've kind of been in more of the coaching leadership side. So whether it was at Team Velocity or some of the other companies I've consulted with over the past couple of years, my kind of value I've been bringing, which is the development and coaching and the building side and putting some processes and structures in place. And at the end of the day, the thing I always come back to is pitch, pace, and attitude is the biggest part of that. So whether teaching a brand new guy who's never done sales before, which has kind of been my forte in this industry, or taking over a seasoned sales team or a seasoned salesperson, getting back to the foundation of that has kind of always been the key and kind of really what I've focused on and emphasized on.
So you've mentioned one thing that I want you to explore or explain a little bit more is the attitude or mindset when it comes to sales. Can you get into that?
Yeah, so look, sales is a great job when it's going good. But when it's not going good, it's a very difficult job. And I could tell you one thing, I'll go back to that job where I sold DirecTV. I had a team, I was building a team, and we were doing really well. And I had like 10 people on my team. And there was a couple of guys that I would know that I would send them into a store. And if they made a sale in the first hour, they were going to make 2 or 3 sales that day. But if they did not make a sale in the first hour, I might as well send them home because they were not going to make a sale that day. And it was all tied to the mindset around how important confidence is to a salesperson. So I would say that typically the biggest thing to look at, which is when we talk about pitch, pace, and attitude, pitch is the words. It's easy to say the words. You can learn the words. It's a script. It's a talk track. It's an elevator pitch. It's how you overcome objections. Words are pretty much something you can learn, memorize, and familiarize yourself with. Attitude is just ties back to your work ethic. Are you willing to go the extra mile? Are you willing to pick up the phone, wait one more call, or step into an additional dealership? But the attitude part is typically the biggest variable. And can you maintain confidence on a bad day? Can you not get too confident on a good day? Can you carry a good day to another good day to another good day and build on that aspect? And that's typically, I would say, the biggest differentiator from a good salesperson to not a good salesperson, which is how well they can carry on the confidence or the momentum of a good day.
So how do you instill that into somebody who, is early in their sales career and is, looking to explore more? They think they have the gift of gab. They're really good at being able to talk to people and understand what their needs are, but the mindset isn't necessarily there. It's one of those people that you had worked with that within the first hour, if they're not making the sale, they're useless. They're not there. The momentum is so key. How do you coach that into someone who's fresh into sales?
So first off, I systemize everything. I believe there's a reason why Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and Isaiah Thomas, as great as a basketball player as they were they never really excellent at being head coaches. So I don't believe that in order to be a good leader or a good coach, you necessarily have to be the superstar as a player. But when you can put a system like Phil Jackson did or Steve Kerr did around talent, then all of a sudden you can make not just the best player great, but you can lift everybody up through that. So for me, there's systems I like to put in place that will allow me to get the strengths out of all the players And part of that for me, which has always been foundationally in a thing called law of averages and knowing your numbers. And, you know, if I'm managing or coaching a cold calling team, I'm saying, how many calls are you making? How many connections are you getting? How many of those connections are turning into set demos? How many set demos are shown or getting into the pipeline? What's your average sales cycle? What's your average deal size? All these things of knowing your numbers can track the activity level of somebody, but more importantly, when those numbers are tracked, and as a good leader, you know how to then look at those numbers and then apply the coaching towards those specific weaknesses, then all of a sudden you can kind of understand where that person needs help. Now, one of the things that when I'm interviewing, when I'm building a team, I look for people who have three things. I look for people who have a tough, strong mindset. Now, everybody in the interview process is going to tell me they have that, but if they truly have that, that's somebody who's going to be successful. I look for somebody who's coachable. I would rather bring somebody in who's never sold anything one day in my life than bring somebody who's got 20 years of experience, good or bad. Those people tend to be just less coachable. But as long as they're coachable, it doesn't matter. And then last thing, I look for people who are self-aware. And the reason why the self-awareness is so important is if you're coachable, but you're not self-aware, then you're going to get coaching and asking for help on things that you don't necessarily have a weakness on. So for me, it's about having that person I'm coaching or that person I'm working with or that team I'm building, trust that I have the answers to their problems if they can let me understand where their problems are. So be transparent. Do we need to work harder? Do we need better talk tracks? Do we need to fix the mindset, the confidence? And by knowing the numbers typically allows me to diagnose that. But the other thing I would say that you have to have the confidence of your team, that your team knows that everything you're asking them to do, you can do and you're willing to do it. So instead of, I think leaders lead from the front, I think managers coach from the back. So you got to be willing to be a leader and be able to get in the dirt. You can't go ask your person to do something and say, go do it, instead of say, hey, come here, let me show you how to do it. And I think that's the difference that most leaders I've seen not necessarily be willing to have.
No, I would agree. I think that self-awareness as any professional is very important, right? That makes you more coachable. It makes you more aware of when your mindset is down for the day. It changes everything else. I think that before anything else, that is the one thing that I look for in people is just if they're self-aware. The more self-aware they are, the easier they are to coach. The easier it is to lift their mindset and coach that in them, because not everybody's going to have great days every day. But it's the self-awareness to realize, I'm having a crap day. I just need to do, let me just get one more call out. Let me get one more connection request done and see if that's the thing that leads to that momentum that I was seeking this morning.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then one other thing in the question you originally asked me too, which is when I have that guy who maybe I see struggles with the confidence, as a manager, you have to be able to know the feel of when it's time for you to break a salesperson or an employee versus build an employee. Sometimes you have to be able to kind of really hover that fine line where that guy or girl who is probably struggling with a little bit of confidence, you got to probably go out of your way to find small wins and give them some confidence and inject that confidence in them when you can. And there's other times when you got people that are confident for no reason, and you have to kind of pull them back down and bring them back down to a level. So I think that's another big part as a coach, which is knowing when it's time for you to push, when it's time for you to pull, when it's time for you to build and break. And that's something that I don't know if a lot of people have the ability to address and assess.
Yeah, and sales is strange, right? I think that there are quite a few more people there that have a false ego because they have had some quick wins or they're new into the game and they're able to make some quick sales, and it just makes them feel really good about what it is that they're doing and pursuing, and it may not be something sustainable for them long term.
Yeah, and in reverse of that, and I agree with everything you said, but in reverse of that, a lot of times what I've seen a lot of people do, which is sell themselves on all the excuses they put in their own mind on why they can't be successful, why it didn't work. And very often those things don't point back to themselves. That's why for me, as a coach and as a mentor of young salespeople, I say, let's go back to the things you can control: pitch, pace, and attitude. Can we improve the pitch? Can we talk to more people? Or can we fix our mindset? At the end of the day, the customer's budget or this or that, or they're not answering, can't control those things. Why focus on them? Let's focus on what is inside of our control.
Yep. I call that our sphere of influence.
There you go.
What's within your sphere of influence? What can I do within my sphere to influence someone else's decision or influence my own mindset, right? Like I've got a small toddler. There's only so much influence I have on him because, his attention span is 15 seconds.
Yeah.
So focus on the things that I have control over on a regular basis, whereas the things like budget, I just need to let go of that. If my client doesn't have the budget for them to be in a brand new GMC Yukon, cool, just let that go. Maybe I'll get them in a 2020, right? That's just as nice. Let's change topics a little bit and let's get more into the automotive side and talk about some of the trends and how it affects you and your organization as a whole. So I know that there's been quite a few trends on the auto side, like supply chain, consumer behaviors, especially with high interest rates, digital transformation, whether that be marketing or cybersecurity, which is a big one right now. How do any of those or all of those things influence what it is that you guys do at your organization?
So, the reality of it is all of those things will be a different influence on every dealer. So whether it was the big CDK issue that happened a couple of months ago, whether it was another thing or another thing, every dealer tends to deal differently with that. We at Worldwide come in to help dealerships is when they need help with the BDC. And that's one of the probably most overlooked segments of a dealership. I've had so many customers over the years will refer to that as, oh, I got a good guy. He shows up on time. He's a good guy, but he's not good for the floor. So just throw him into the BDC. In reality, I would say the BDC should be where you put your best salespeople, where you are putting your first communication with your customers, the people where that is. So a lot of times when we come in and we meet with a client, that's where their biggest gap is. They don't have the strongest people. They don't have the best people. That division inside of the dealership is almost an afterthought. And so whether we come in and help them orchestrate a process to improve their in-house BDC, or what typically happens most often is they see the value in us being the BDC from an outsourced perspective and providing the same activity that could be provided in the dealership, but with far better talk tracks, scripts, and solutions. That type of program just blows up the success of a store. So we offer 3 types of programs with Worldwide BDC. Number one, we have a sales BDC, which is the most common. Most people think of a BDC to do, which is a lead comes in from Auto Trader or from the website. Somebody pick up the phone, handle that lead, guide that customer into the store to buy a new car and to trade in their old car. What we also specialize in, which is the service to sale model, which is they're at your store servicing their vehicle. They're in the waiting room. We're calling those customers, trying to get those customers that are in the store servicing to come in to the sales side, get an assessment on their current vehicles being serviced, and put them into a newer vehicle based off their current scenario. And then we also help dealerships be the BDC and essentially the inbound call center for their service center, because so often these store service centers are so busy with their people under cars and in cars, they don't have somebody answering the phone. And that's one of the biggest gaps at a dealership, which is people are calling into the service center, asking questions, wanting to get the phone answered. It just takes so long. So in a lot of times, we'll be able to cover that gap and be able to answer the call for the dealership and kind of facilitate that conversation for them. So we kind of can handle all of those things. About 20% of the clients we work with have an in-house service. 80% of us, we end up being the solution for them from our BDC and based in Florida.
From a a pricing perspective, and we don't have to get into numbers, are
Sure.
you typically more competitive than having an in-house BDC?
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so let's just say, for instance, today I talked to a used car store that sells 50 cars a month.
Mhm.
Us being able to come in and be their BDC where they would get significantly better value than they could ever get, hiring an individual person to be a BDC instead of having a team behind them handling and knowing how to do it. The other part that comes into this as well is that a lot of these stores, they don't even have anybody that will spend the time to train that person and to keep them accountable, Brian. So, that's the other part is we have a whole infrastructure, a team of leaders. Almost every single person in Worldwide BDC has at one point worked in a BDC in a store. Our whole leadership team, from Jason, the owner, to all of our coaches that are working with our BDC agents in our office, they have all worked in a store and have run a BDC and have been in that environment. And we just take what we've learned in the store and bring it back to us.
So let's talk about another trend that may be more applicable to having impacts to worldwide. Let's talk about some of the consumer behaviors right now in the marketplace, because we have seen much higher interest rates than we did, say 3, 4 years ago. How is that impacted worldwide from, being able to find and land new clients to work with you, or them just the actual dealerships thinking about taking that work back in house? How has that impacted you guys?
I wouldn't say it's made a big difference. Now, one of the things that we've done recently since I've come to Worldwide, I bring an experience that the team didn't necessarily have prior to me joining, and I come from a marketing and website background. So
Sure.
now when I meet with dealers, I can sit down and assess not just when they get a lead, how Worldwide can get that lead into the store, which is the primary thing. We're not trying to sell the car over the phone. We're just trying to get the lead into the store, right?
Right.
But I can also sit down with them and assess where they're spending their money, what is working, what's not working, and making sure that when they're putting $50,000 to a paid advertising budget, is it effective? If they're spending money on X third party or Y third party, is it worth the investment? We have a lot of different ways to sit down and assess, not just how to take those leads and to get them in, but also what is working from your budget to make sure you're getting more out of your budget. When it comes to all of those market trends around rates and inventory, that isn't necessarily something that even affects us at all. It might affect the ability for the dealership to then take that customer who's landed in their store and then get them closed on a deal. But for us, it doesn't really change what we do from our position.
Totally. And that makes sense. It's just like it's one of those things that I like to explore with all aspects of individuals who are supporting into the auto industry. I've had a few of these conversations with GMs. I've had a few of them with organizations who have major contracts for doing detailing on used cars to be able to turn those around for resale. So it's really kind of interesting how across the market some of these things that from an outsider's perspective you would think would have more impact, and it doesn't. It kind of continues on regardless. People need cars, they're going to continue to buy cars. But you would think with car ownership and purchasing a car being one of typically the second largest purchase you'll make in your lifetime, that because there's been a higher interest rate, you would see a slowdown in consumer behaviors, but
I
not
would say,
necessarily the fact.
yeah, and I would say one of the things I saw since 2020 is I've really been able to see from a vendor side the separation of a good operator and a bad operator from the dealership world. It has been a very clear distinction. Those dealerships that were able to adjust to COVID times, adjust to not being able to have an inventory open. I saw so many stores, and I worked at DealerOn at the time, so many stores shifting to how can we get cars transferred without a customer walking in, and the shift to everybody asking about virtual digital retailing, which had always been on the landscape for the past 10 years, but nobody ever really adopted it, to where in 2020 you started seeing people adopt it. To then we came out of that period where people couldn't come in the store, but then they stopped having inventory. And then that inventory issue ended up becoming a disadvantage to some and a major advantage to others. And I think some people that it was an advantage to took advantage of the advantage they had, and they price gouged their community, price gouged their area. And there's a lot of fallout out of all of those different things, and how well you were as an operator during COVID, inventory shortages, pricing availability, and then interest rates. It is weeded out. I think it has weeded out some bad operators. I think if you combine that along with, I think one of the biggest things that I don't hear going talked about enough that happened since COVID, which is the consolidation of big groups buying a lot of the middle groups buying a lot of the little family-owned stores. And I think that as a whole is probably not the best thing for the average consumer, how we're getting so many major conglomerates, and a lot of these little family-owned 3-store groups are getting eaten up by the middle-sized ones. The middle ones are getting eaten up by the big ones. Just provides less diversity in ideas and less diversity in options.
Yeah, when I was in automotive, that was one of the kind of the trends that I was seeing. But I think that's regardless of industry. We're starting to see more and more consolidation regardless of the industry, right? You're going to continue to see, and I think it's slowed down now that interest rates are higher. When it was closer to 2020, when you could borrow cash for nothing, you were seeing a lot more larger industries or larger organizations buy up as many of their competitors in the industry to have that consolidation. And I would agree. I don't think it's the best thing for the consumer or for ideas, but it also allows for the opposite side of that. I think is it allows for new entrepreneurs to challenge those markets who can have a lot better pace than what has now become these bloated organizations that have disjointed acquisitions that don't necessarily fit into the overall organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you see the rise of some of these huge, massive used car operations, and you see just the growth of the used car dealer and the independent dealer. I think that's another place we see growing over time, which is the ability to innovate through the used car inventory and not just focusing on the brand specific one. Because I think the brand specific one, if I had to project, and this is a full just guess and projection, I think the franchise stores are going to try to eliminate franchise stores from the spectrum. I think that you see some OEMs that are going out there right now that are testing the buy from the manufacturer and why have a franchise store open. And I think there's going to be a lot of that change over the next maybe 10 years.
Do you think that Tesla had anything to do with that?
I think that Tesla had an ability to prove the model, but I think the bigger proof of that model was when stores weren't able to be open. And then franchises had to go to the manufacturer to order their inventory, and they were making the inventory based off of that. And they were like, well, if I just market my franchise and cut out tier 2 and tier 3, then I can just go directly to the consumer and they can order their vehicle on demand. And they've already shown that they're willing to pay a lot more and they're willing to wait a little bit for the right car. Why do I need the dealership to sell it?
That would be an interesting trend. I think that the implications there would be interesting when it comes to service.
That's the financial value of most of these dealerships, right? It's the
Right.
Right. So I see more quick lanes being opened up, but maybe less new car operations or a consolidation of those.
Well, I think it would also go to like a lot of these independent auto shops that excel in, say German manufacturers. You're going to see a lot more of those become higher in demand than they already are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And when you factor out the financing advantages that the manufacturer offer in the franchise, and you put in those financing options back into these independent stores, the value difference of going through a franchise location versus an independent. I think a lot of clients are going to like working with what they think is a community-based business instead of some of these massive 200 plus store organizations.
Yeah, it's interesting to have conversations with local GMs and just watching their passion for their community and not seeing that story enough of the things that they've done within the community. I think that they really need to start touting that, because that's a huge differentiator to a consumer, knowing that you're in the community, you're doing these things, you're helping out here, here, and here. If you're not talking about that enough, you're not doing these things on a monthly basis and having some sort of either like local news come out, or even if you're just doing publicity on your own website, it's doing you a disservice. You're wasting your time doing these events.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was at DealerOn, one of the big products we sold there was search engine optimization. So a lot of times what we would do, part of that is a local SEO approach. And a lot of the conversations I would have, which is, what are the things you're doing around the community? I mean, it sounds like you would not be surprised that how proud these owners and general managers are for what they do in their community. And I don't think, like you said, I don't think it gets talked about enough. I mean, we focus a lot of times on this massive, 700 car a month operations, but most of these franchise dealers are in rural cities that sell 50 to 70 cars a month. They're in a very community-based store. And man, they're doing so much in and for their community. And I tell you, these dealerships are typically a representation of their community. And there's so many great examples I have of that. And those are the type of dealers I've always kind of gone after and probably enjoyed the most, are the ones that are, they just appreciate every little thing you do with them and for them in that sense as well.
Totally. So let's talk about something else from a trend perspective. Since you do business kind of around the US, what sort of regional trends are you seeing, or are you seeing anything? How does that differ for region to region in your perspective?
I haven't put too much thought into regional perspective. So I don't have anything that jumps out at me that I see that's just a glaring difference between the Northeast and in Texas, or the Southeast and California. There's nothing that really jumps out at me that just says, man, that's a big difference.
Totally get it. All right, so next topic. Let's talk about some advice that you would give to your younger self, or someone who's coming up in sales. What would you say to that person if they wanted to be where you are now?
So when I'm talking to a younger person in sales, or just, let's even remove the sales part of that question, just a younger person in their career, I typically try to advise people to look at three things from an employment perspective, what employment has to offer. Number one, I think it offers you the opportunity to get paid and financial security. That's why anybody goes to work. That most people wouldn't do what they do for free forever. They do it because they get paid to do it, right? Number two, I think, is the ability to add additional skills that can leverage in future opportunities, whether it's with your current company and an additional role that you might want to grow into, or with whatever you might want to do in the near future. And then number three would be your network. And for me, that if I could go back and tell myself one thing, I would say, emphasize significantly less on how much money a job is paying you, and emphasize more on the skills that they're adding to your tool belt and the network you're able to create. And know that if there's one of those things that are the most valuable to you in your 50 or 60-year career, then that's going to be your network. Now, I've since, as a 41-year-old guy who's been doing this for over 20 years, I've now since learned that far more important than the salary a company pays me or commission they pay me, being able to surround myself with people that will bring value to me personally and professionally, not just today, but for the rest of my professional career, is the most important thing to do. So I always tell people, focus less on making money in your first 10 years of your career, focus more on adding the skills, building your resume, building your network. And if you do those things, then it's undeniable to me that the money will ultimately never be an issue. But focus on building the skills and learn as much as you can and learn from as many people as you can. I think that's the biggest thing I would tell my younger self. I learned it over time, but I probably missed about 10 years of focusing more on how much money will a company pay me versus what ultimately I'll get out of it in the end.
Yeah, I think that that's a hard lesson learned with time, is that especially when you're new to the workforce, you just get so excited about the money and having that financial freedom that you start using it poorly. So then it continues to stay about the money and not necessarily about the things that will help you develop long term.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So what are you had mentioned learning and personal growth and development. What are three things that you would suggest someone learn to be successful in sales, other than attitude, mindset?
Yeah. I would say find a mentor, find a coach, find somebody who's walked in your shoes that you trust can show you the path. Far better than making your own path is have people that you trust that can follow. I have personal mentors today. I try to do my best to mentor as many people as possible without anything in return. That would be one. I would say focus on improving every day. Learn, listen, read as much. I'm not a big reader, I'm going to be honest, but I do a lot of audiobooks and I do a lot of podcasts and I learn from a lot of people. And then I would also tell, which I think is becoming more common, but it's something I've learned, is focus on your health, and your physical health will translate to your mental health, and your mental health will translate to success. So I think that one of the things that is really going to be valuable to any salesperson, which is get up in the morning, go for a workout, lift some hard weights, put your body through something tough before you get into your day, and the rest of your day becomes a lot easier. If the hardest thing you do is get a no from a customer in that day, you didn't do enough. But if the hardest thing you did was hit a PR on a weightlifting event or run the fastest mile you've ever run or whatever you might like to do, those things tend to put other things into perspective, and things aren't that serious when you can put yourself through a little bit of stress outside of work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I got back into the gym about a year ago, and right, having that anchor my day has been really beneficial for me. You know, going in and doing a PR and coming home and telling my wife about it, or this morning I failed a PR and it doesn't feel great, but I went for it. And that was hard, right? So that was probably the hardest thing that I did today is I went for a PR, I failed at it, but failure is not about failing. It's about learning from the failure. Like, I'll try it again in 6 weeks. The other thing that
They didn't ever try their PR today.
right, right. The other thing that I found was super beneficial for me from the mental growth perspective was, one, meditation, right? It takes 10 minutes to do. It seems silly at first, right? I have ADHD, and it really helps me focus on a singular thing at a time. And that's been hugely beneficial for being an entrepreneur, being able to focus on what someone is telling me and engaging with them. I think similar with sales, you need to be able to listen and engage on a singular person or thing at any given time. The other one is just journaling. It helps me kind of recap what my happened in my day, what my goals are for tomorrow, and that way I'm just keeping on track. If I take a long weekend, right, I can go back and look at my journal and understand, oh, I left this thing off. I can pick right back up on it. It just makes the continuity for myself a lot easier.
Yeah, I wish I could have been better at journaling. I did have a mentor of mine challenge me to do this whole process where you go in every day and you write out 10 things you're grateful for every morning. And man, Brian, I tell you that the challenge that possesses, I mean, the first couple times you do it, you're like, I'm thankful for my 4-year-old daughter. I'm thankful for my wife. And it's really high level, surface level. But when you get 90 days into doing that every day, you really got to go search for something to be grateful for. But when you start your day in a world where you're finding 10 things to be grateful for, and you're really focusing on that, it sets the mindset in a different place. And I'm a big goal setter. I think that setting goals and accomplishing goals, like your PR, it's more about setting the goals and running towards those than accomplishing them. I think that a person that has no goals and has no thing they're running towards, I think they're probably just running around in a circle, or like one of those mice on a wheel type deal.
Totally.
The path to run and run that race.
So on the flip side of good advice, what's the worst professional advice you've ever gotten?
Man, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, I would say probably the worst professional advice I got would tie into, probably a younger version of myself, allowing myself to get caught into office drama, office communication, listening to other disgruntled employees that would allow me to then become a disgruntled employee. Those would be probably the worst advice, not a direct, like, do this and then I did it, but allowing myself to engage in that mind suck, which only affects my mindset, and puts me into a negative attitude position, which does never allow me to be successful. So I would say that would probably where my head goes to mostly when it comes to that.
Yeah, that mindset of others, right, is hugely contagious, or can be, especially if someone is unhappy. As an entrepreneur, as an employer, like it's hard to stop something like that, other than like if you hear it, try to talk to the person who has the issue. But once it's out there, it's kind of like a plague. It spreads fast, and it's wild.
Yeah, I think trust comes back to it. So whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're leading a small team or a big team, I think that the better you can do to connect with your people as actual people, not
Mhm.
employees, the better they actually trust that your intentions are in the right place and you truly have their back through that, the better chance you're actually getting a transparent version of what they think, the goods and the bads. And I think as leaders, whether you're an entrepreneur or leading a division or a department or whatever you might be leading, I think that's the only thing you can do to control that aspect, which is just do the best to be an example of what good looks like, and just to earn the trust, and know that if that is happening around you, or more importantly underneath you, you probably have to look back at yourself and say, what is it about me that is not allowing them to trust me to be transparent with where their gripe is?
Love that. Love that. All right. I'm just trying to be mindful of our time. So this is when I give you 90 seconds to plug anything you want, whether that's worldwide or finding a mentor or whatever. So the floor is yours, Matt.
Yeah, so I'll start with worldwide. If you are a dealership and you have any issues currently with your BDC and you want help, whether that is having us come in and work with your current team, whether that's having us come in and be that team for you, reach out to me. You can sit me on my cell phone. It's 214-436-6968. Outside of worldwide, I also have created a sales academy where I've done kind of on the side thing where I do coaching, training, and development of young individual salespeople. I've done that for the past 2 years, where I've kind of helped people, run them, teach them how to do sales, try to help them get jobs. I also have a consultancy firm where I do consultancy for companies who are needing help in regards to their growth plans and growing and building. So whether you are an individual who needs coaching or a company who needs coaching, by all means, reach out to me. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help you. I'd be glad to talk with you more about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Matt, I appreciate your time today.